Yeah, so my name's Matthew Griffin. I've been working in disruption and futures for about 10 years. I'm ex-IBM, ex-EMC. I've worked for a variety of system integrators. Now, when we have a look at this picture, this is actually a real picture basically from Eagle Creek during a bushfire. So I always tend to think, and I came across it recently, by the way, as well, I tend to think these are the executives. So when we talk about disruption, basically in the future, and things are changing quickly, these are the executives. They just turn their back, basically, and they carry on. We've got the analysts, basically over here, who are looking towards the forest fire, basically, and saying, hey, look, you know, we think something's coming. We can see something in the background. We're not really sure what it is, but we know it's big and orange. I'm the guy, basically, that's in the fire. So I work with a whole variety of different organizations around the world. So from Shanghai, basically, where we are building smarter cities in India, all the way through to Dubai, where we are building smarter countries. I work with organizations like Huawei, basically to help them predict not just the next smartphone or the one after that, but what are the 5 generations of smartphones after that, and what comes after the smartphone. So the products and devices that you'll be using in circa 2025, 2030, basically, et cetera, et cetera. And then outside of that, I'm also a mentor, basically, for a variety of Google X Prize teams. So this year, we'll be putting a couple of landers on the moon, and we're going to be turning what we call the 7th continent, basically, into essentially a mining outpost. That's what we're really trying to do there. So I work with lots of organizations, trying to help them decode the future and decode disruption. And by disruption, we can also include disintermediation into that as well. So when we have a look at today's marketplace, some of the things, basically, that we considered science fiction 10, 20 years ago, even yesterday, are now starting to become real. So deflector shields. We know how to create a deflector shield. You fire a laser at the atmosphere, it creates something called a Fermi lens, and you can deflect lasers. That's a concept, but that's going to be generated and produced in about 2030 by BAE. Things like tractor beams again, Star Trek and sci-fi. We can move things with light and we can move things with sound. We've been able to do it for a few years. We started off just moving small particles, but now we're actually up to ball-bearing sized things. But again, it's a tractor beam. You know, it might not look impressive, but actually being able to move things with light, basically, and being able to move things with sound, it's a tractor beam. We can 3D print food now. So if you want to pay £250, you can go to a pop-up restaurant in London called Food Inc. The chairs are 3D printed. The cutlery is 3D printed, the food is 3D printed. Hey ho. Now, when we start talking about some real disruption, everybody in this room and shares a commonality with every single organism on Earth. You all have 4 base pairs. Last year, we managed to create literally an alien life form that has 6 base pairs. Never been seen before. But the things that you can do with a 6 base pair alien, essentially, is staggering. Then we went one step further. We then teleported it. So, again, when we talk about teleportation, a lot of people think, you know, Star Trek, you know, flashy beams of light and all these kinds of things. What we managed to do is we managed to decode the genome of particular viruses. We managed to digitize them. We then emailed them to a 3D printer. Now, the 3D printer could actually either be in the room next door or it could be on another planet. But you can now 3D print life. That's kind of teleportation. So what I've got next, I've got a little sort of pop piece I want to play you. And I'll explain why in a bit.
Wish I could touch beyond what I can touch. I wish I could feel beyond what isn't real. I wish I could imagine.
So what did you think of that? If we rate it out of 10, how many people would give it below 5? Oh, heathen. 6? Okay. 7? Okay. 8? 9? Okay, 10? Okay, so should we rate this about 7.5? Looks about right, okay? So I actually was giving a keynote in South Africa a couple of weeks ago, but I actually gave it exactly the same score. Now, what you've just seen there shouldn't really exist, because it shouldn't exist until about 2030 or 2035. That song was composed, compiled, and created by an artificial intelligence. It's had 500 million views. It's got 420,000 subscribers, something absolutely crazy. That shouldn't exist. It's a creative AI. So when I go and have a conversation basically with executives, basically when we talk about disruption and disruption of the status quo, this is what they say. Can you say it with me? Great, you are all executives. Well done. That's it. Your executive coaching teams will be proud of you. So what I want to do is I want to sort of go into some of the disruption mechanics, because I thought it would sort of be a bit fun. If you want to disrupt a market, basically it's not one thing, it's not two things, it's about 50 things. You have to do a lot to disrupt a market. But when you're disrupting, basically a lot of organizations today think that innovation is disruption. It isn't. Innovation is not the same as disruption, because disruption basically is innovation combined with execution. So when we're having a look at what you need to do if you want to truly disrupt a market, so we talked about earlier disintermediators, who's going to win, incumbents or disintermediators? If the disintermediators can get a good product and they can execute perfectly in the marketplace, they can become the new incumbents. But trying to do that's really, really tricky. So what we have is we have culture and innovation. So we have the operating model on the left-hand side. Culture, discovery, prototyping, that's kind of where you go out, you understand your customer needs, you innovate, and you do all the sort of traditional things that you do when you ideate. On the right-hand side, basically, we have exponential technologies. Those are the technologies that move the dial typically by 10x. So 3D printing, AI, blockchain, quantum computing, robotics, synthetic biology, VR, all those kinds of things basically that we hear about every single day, day in, day out. And then finally at the bottom we have exponential adoption. So on the one hand, exponential adoption is a function of go-to-market in here. However, sometimes basically your product and your company can suddenly be raised to the heavens because of geopolitics, because of the regulators. So take, for example, so we're having a conversation about Volvo basically with self-driving cars. If the regulators don't allow self-driving cars on the roads, what happens to that disruption? Goes nowhere. If, on the other hand, the regulators say the only thing that you can buy is a self-driving car or an electric vehicle as they are, so 2030, 2040, there are lots of governments around the world, China, India, France, Germany, China, UK, that now say you can only buy electric vehicles basically from 2030, 2040. All of a sudden, if you have a self-driving car and the regulators say you can only buy a self-driving car, you're a hero. So using your phrase there, David. Now, when we have a look at disruption, the traditional place to start basically is value chains. So, we all know this. Basically, you can have a look basically for opportunities, weaknesses, strengths, cost takeout basically in a particular value chain. But value chains themselves are changing. Increasingly, they're digital. So we're no longer sort of buying less physical product. We're now thumping digital products and services through the value chain. However, when we talk about things like disintermediation, typically disintermediation sort of sits around here. So if you want to disintermediate an incumbent, you can change your message. You can, say for example, you're selling nappies. You try to, a lot of the marketing basically goes to women. If you can market to men buy nappies as well, because I'm a father, all of a sudden you're disintermediating the incumbents if you get the execution right. Things like alternative industries. If you want to disintermediate the airline industry, something we talked about earlier, you can have a look at alternative industries. So when we have a look at transportation, if you want to disintermediate an airline, then having a train that travels at 700 miles an hour basically is a good way to start the process. And that's something called the Hyperloop. It's a Mach 1 train. In China, they're now starting to develop trains that go 2,500 miles per hour. So what does that suddenly do for a long-distance airline? But again, it's not easy. You've got to have the capital to invest in the research and development of a 2,500 mile an hour train. You then need to lay the tracks, etc. But once it's laid, that's it. Why would you go back to aircraft? So having a little look at the technology piece, basically we're all sort of familiar with this. Exponential. So this is sort of Moore's law, where we have a doubling of price performance, basically every 18 months. However, when you have a look at the top axis, the rate of disruption is increasing. If we step back about 100 years ago, if you wanted to disrupt an industry at scale, whatever that industry was, it would take you about 90 years. Started dropping to 45, to 15, to 7. And today, basically, if we have a look at sort of, 2017, we're roughly at the sort of 7-year mark. If you want to disrupt an industry, you can disrupt it roughly within about 7 years with the right tailwinds. Now, when we start looking further forward, we can see a way to disrupt industries, not just in 4, but also in 2. And actually, technically, you could disrupt an industry in real time. And again, this is a lot of the mistakes, basically, a lot of executives are making today, is about the future. And we'll come on to that. So, again, when we have a look at the number of net new startups in the world, it's gone up by a tenfold. So it's now 100 million new startups around the world. We have the democratization of very, very powerful technologies. If you want to plug into the world's most powerful artificial intelligence, get a credit card out. You want to tap into a supercomputer, get a credit card out, pay $10, go to AWS. Now, so on the one hand, we have the democratization of very, very powerful technologies. We have 3.5 billion people on the planet connected today. Over the next 5 to 10 years, something I'll show later, we will have, with the right tailwind again, pretty much everybody on the planet connected. So all of a sudden, if we give access to democratized technologies to 7 billion people, you are hoping that from an industry perspective, you are not going to be disrupted by one person on the planet who has a really good idea, the innovation quotient, and the execution that they need to disrupt your industry. The odds of disruption increase. However, we don't have one exponential technology. We actually have about 170 of them. So if we have a look at the energy space, for example, just taking a simple one, basically where we can talk about some disintermediation quickly, we've seen significant advances recently in nanomanufacturing. So that's helped us create nanoceramics. If I came to you and said, I think you should care about nanoceramics, Centrica, you probably wouldn't. However, if you use a nanoceramic and you put it into a nuclear reactor, you can boost the output of that nuclear reactor by 30%. You can start changing the cost economics of the nuclear power industry. That starts increasing your competitive advantage. Other technologies that we have, we've got gene editing, and I'll sort of just race through some. We've got fusion coming online. Basically, from a computing perspective, we have DNA computers. So if you want to store your data in DNA, in 2020, you can go to Microsoft Azure, and you'll be able to store your information in DNA storage. We have quantum computers coming online. If you are in a secure industry, quantum computers will let you crack 70% of all of today's encryption codes within about 3 minutes. Today, a brute force attack basically on something like 1028 encryption will take you about 1 billion years. So the problem basically that we have when we talk about disruption is we've got lots of technologies. This is the S-curve. When we talk about technology, it has a slow pace of development. It just sort of stutters along the bottom, slowly being developed. It then goes through an accelerated rate of development, and all of a sudden it starts taking off and develops exponentially, and then it starts plateauing. Now, if you step back 10, maybe 20 years ago, and I asked you what exponential technologies you were tracking that were important to your business, you might say, well, computing power. And if I said, well, okay, what could you do in the future? What could you do if you had access to more computing power? And you could come up with some answers. Well, I could create better big data models, all sorts of bits and pieces. I could do better computational fluid dynamic modeling and all that kind of stuff. And if I said, well, what's the impact of that? You'd be able to say, it's this. It's fairly straightforward. The problem that we have today is we don't have one of these S-curves. We have multiple of them. And they're all coming at the same time. So now we take, for example, the Moore's law. So if I give you access basically to faster computers, quantum computers that run 100 million times faster than today's best computers, what could you do with that? What could you do with blockchain? You know, what can you do with 3D printing? What happens if you combine artificial intelligence and blockchain? Well, if you combine them with cloud, you get more intelligent robots. If you combine artificial intelligence with machine vision and robots, you suddenly get a very, very different type of robot, which is why all of a sudden, basically, we are talking about automating a lot of the jobs that we see today, basically, on such a huge scale, not just physical labor, but cognitive work as well. So we'll skip over that. So what we now have is we're now in this sort of race to zero, because increasingly the cost of building a business has fallen by about 1,000-fold, and it's going to get much, much cheaper to build businesses. So giving you an example, if I asked all of you today to create an application, if I said, go out, go and create an application, you might tell me, oh, we don't have any coding skills. I went to school, but I just don't do coding. I said, well, okay, that's fine. So we use a conversational platform. So that's a computer you can talk to, something like Siri. We combine it with something like Microsoft Deepcoder, which is an AI that can create programs. And again, we're at the start of this thing. So you go on to, say, Cortana, and you say, Cortana, build me an application that looks like this. It will go off, it scrapes code from GitHub, Stack Overflow, all those kinds of things. It will put together an application. And then it will say, is that OK? And you say, well, I'd like it in blue. I'd like a logo. I'd like to change the features. I'd like to add this. It goes off and does it. Creating a software company in 2005 would cost you about $10 million. Today, you can do it for about $5,000 if you're careful, but not really. We're getting to the point, basically, where the child in the African slum outside of Johannesburg, if they have a laptop and internet connectivity, they can suddenly create something. And if they can execute, who knows? Could be worth a good number of billions. Now, one of the things I said earlier, basically, was that we might get to the point where we can disrupt industries almost in real time. Now, for those of you that think, well, that's impossible, you're thinking that in the future you're going to be up against human entrepreneurs. Human entrepreneurs basically are very, very good. They're very skillful. I work with lots of them. But the innovation process, building and scaling a business, is still relatively slow, still relatively linear. We are increasingly building the next generation of creative machines that are already building their own businesses. So there's a Wall Street company called Ada. It is an artificial intelligence hedge fund that has no staff, and it invests hundreds of millions of dollars. And there's lots more. They're called distributed autonomous organizations. There are many, many more of these coming through. So what I'm going to do now is show you essentially the start of the process of the automation of innovation. These pieces haven't been put together before, but with some of the companies I'm now working with, we're looking to automate innovation. Next one. So disruption has changed. It's cheaper, faster, and it's going viral.
What if you could come up with thousands of options for a single design without drawing, all of which meet specific goals set by the designer? And from those options, pick the one design that delivers on the most important criteria, the design you couldn't possibly have imagined. This is generative design, a technology that harnesses massive computing power, creating forms with precise amounts of material only when needed, achieving maximum performance while wasting nothing. But generative design can be about much more than simply turning out alternatives. Prototypes can be scanned and equipped with sensors that provide real-time performance data that can be looped back into the design process, so the object, in effect, co-designs itself. And depending on the material and method of manufacture chosen, the software can optimize the design for those choices. The things that have limited us in the past, software, materials, manufacturing, no longer do so. With generative design, the world can look and perform any way we want it to. This is the next stage in the evolution of design, and it's happening now.
So again, you take a bog standard product, whether it's a mug, whether it's a car, you use a behavioral interface saying, I would like this car to be more energy efficient. These generative design AIs will go out and they will try to reduce the weight of the car. It's iterative innovation at the moment. It's not primary. It's not game changing. But nevertheless, they will go out. They will figure out a way to use lighter materials. So they will figure out a way to design a better, more fuel efficient car. And where we are today is we are here. We've moved from passive design to generative design, and ultimately they're going to get to the point where they are intuitive and they are empathetic. And when they start getting to these 2 points, this is where they can start tapping into big data, and they can say, you know what, there are loads and loads of people moaning about this particular product. So I've got a design of that product. I'm going to iterate it to solve the problem that I'm hearing, so a big data problem. And I'm then going to send it to the head of R&D and say, look, I think this product solves the problem that 32,000 people are tweeting about. Now, when we start combining these types of technologies with new emerging technologies, the AIs require compute. We've got plenty of that. AI, we have both generic AI, which we call convergent AI, which is sort of very much if this, then that problem solving. We're moving to divergent AI, basically, which is what if. And that's kind of the creative AI. Materials, basically, we have lots and lots of new types of materials coming through, and then we have 3D printing. So what we're now able to do is we can use computing power, have an AI design products for us, bearing in mind that this would accelerate the rate of innovation within any organization, provided you're sort of more hardware-centric at the moment, but software will follow, by anywhere between 1,000 and 10,000 times. Would that mean something to your business if I could accelerate your rate of innovation by 10, let alone anything else? And then we can 3D print the products, basically whether it's prototypes or what have you. So here's another video, and this again is another world first. And it looks weird. Basically, it's a sausage robot. This was done by the University of Norway, or University of Oslo, basically over in Norway. What they wanted this product to do is they wanted it to move from one side of the floor to the other in the fastest, most efficient way possible. That's all they wanted it to do. But what we have here is we have an artificial intelligence that is using the sensors in the robot that is walking across the floor to design a better sausage robot. This is a self-evolving robot. Now today, when we have a look at emerging technologies, you still have to do this. You have to 3D print the sausage robot, and you have to get a human to assemble it. A bit clunky. If we move to 4D printing, the AI will design the robot, the 4D printer will print the robot, and the robot can walk out of the printer. It can then feed information back to the AI can run simulations, design it again. So again, you show this to most people, and they'll think, well, so what? Sausage robot. This is the beginning of creative AIs. Now, is creativity something ethereal, or is it an algorithm and a process that we can boil down? For people who think creativity is an ethereal process, if you want me to email you a methodology for innovation, I can do that. Innovation is a process, and you can turn any process at all into an algorithm. If you can turn it into an algorithm, you can shove it in an AI. This stuff isn't supposed to exist until 2035. So what I wanted to do is I sort of wanted to just sort of do a quick round robin basically of some of the industries that we see, only quickly, just to give you an idea that every industry on Earth is changing for good and bad. Depends if you're an incumbent or a disintermediator. So we obviously have self-driving cars in the automotive sector. In the agricultural sector, we are boiling the cow down, literally. So we can produce meat in bioreactors, that is literally meat, so we can get rid of the cow. We can get rid of the farm because we can stick that into a vertical farm. And out in Japan, we can stick robots into the vertical farm, and we can produce 9 crops a year, and it's fully automated. And that's outside of using drones, satellites, and everything else to really sort of figure out basically what your farm is doing. The advent of Internet of Things and precision agriculture help as well. We can use gene editing to improve the the photosynthesis of crops, so they grow 30% bigger. So again, gene editing, farming, all good, unless you're a cow. In the civil aviation sector, increasingly we're developing hypersonic planes. But these planes, so this is obviously the Virgin Galactic one, these planes basically are using new hypersonic materials. However, they're starting to change and go to electric. So by 2035, we'll start seeing the first electric planes. Regional to start off with, but then we'll start going into continental with things like the Airbus A380. And that creative AI that I showed you helped design part of the A380. And it also helped design something I'll show you in a minute. When we talk about communications, things like nanosats, we are now launching 1,200 satellites into space every year so that we have full blanket coverage of every single square centimetre on Earth. Now, if you take this to Disney and you say, space internet, we're going to be able to cover blanket the world, the entire world with internet, I go, so what? Well, 3.5 billion more consumers for you on Netflix? Sort your business model out? Yeah. Interested now? Oh yeah, we're quite interested in that. In the world of defense, everything is going fully autonomous. So everything from drones, basically we've got fully autonomous capable 600-foot destroyers called the Zumwalt. We have autonomous drones. We've got autonomous mine hunters. We've got smart missiles, you name it. From an education perspective, these guys' basic world is going to be very, very different to the one that we're living in. Now, this could actually be one of the last generations, not the last, but they could be one of the last generations that will learn in a traditional way. Because over the past 2 to 5 years, we've now found ways to upload information to the human brain, as well as download it. We've also managed to figure out a way to stream movies, live movies, from people's heads using skull caps and what we call an fMRI machine. But again, AI is in the mix. So the way that these guys learn today, whether it's using tablets, VR, augmented reality, whether it's using books, that will change. So again, when we talk about automation and AI, a lot of people think that we're going to be left behind. But if I can actually upload knowledge to your brain, matrix style, so you can learn a new skill instantly, maybe about disintermediation, then does that put you on a par, basically, with an AI? Renewables. Renewables are pretty much taking over the world. In fact, there are many that now sort of postulate that the fossil fuel prices will never, ever recover to the point of $100, $150 a barrel, because we've got new disintermediated grids. We've now got something like 168 gigawatts of renewables coming online. The cost of renewables, basically, so in 58 countries, the cost of renewables is now the cheapest form of energy, and that's without some of the geothermal energies that are coming online. When we talk about grid scale storage, that's getting a lot better as well. So we take renewables and the sort of peak loads. Grid scale storage and batteries are helping sort that. So this is New York, but when we have a look across at Los Angeles was the first city on Earth. They wanted to increase the amount of electricity they could consume. They went out to tender for power stations and other bits and pieces. They voted on a virtual power station. The first country, or first state rather, that decided to go with renewables on the blockchain. When we look at financial services sector, the rise of, again, artificial intelligence, if you have a look, for example, at Goldman, 600 equities traders down to 2, automated. When we have a look at when we have a look at Forex trading, that's going onto the blockchain, that's being automated. When we talk about disintermediation, you can use blockchain to disintermediate the SWIFT networks. And in about 3 years, the founders of Ethereum reckon, so Ethereum is a blockchain company, they reckon that they could disintermediate Visa and MasterCard. Now, Visa and MasterCard, sitting pretty, own the payment networks. And they said, it is not going to be possible for us to be disintermediated. Wrong. We have wealth advisors that are being disintermediated. From a healthcare perspective, we can 3D print human organs. So what happens in 10 to 20 years if you have a car crash or you have a heart attack? You don't need to wait for somebody else to die. You can 3D print a personalized organ that comes from your own stem cells. We've got nanotechnologies that are already in us. So you can have a biomarker and a nanite basically go around your bloodstream, and it will pick up the first sign of cancer generally about 2 years before you actually are diagnosed with cancer. Gene editing, designer babies and all that kind of stuff, and amplified intelligence. When we talk about insurance over there, from an insurer's perspective, there's a huge amount of opportunity because the amount of risk within the world as everything becomes connected is staggering. But because there is so much risk, is it something they really want to insure any longer? Because it's systemic risk, so good and bad for insurers. In Dubai, we're going to be 3D printing the world's first 80-story skyscraper, and by 2030, 25% of all of Dubai will be 3D printed. And that's without looking at manufacturing. If you have a look at, for example, some of the retailers, they're using 3D printing. These are architect sneakers from Under Armour. These were designed by an AI. They are $300. They're actually apparently very comfy. But if these were Adidas, what we could now do is we could now digitize these, push that to a tablet in store. You could personalize them and have them 3D printed in the back. So what happens to Adidas's supply chain, their manufacturing companies? They have, what happens to their inventory? It's great if you're Adidas, great if you're a retailer. From a robot perspective, and we're almost done, we combine traditional robots. Traditional robots basically were sort of fairly dumb, but you now connect them to the cloud, you hook them into AI, you give them machine vision capabilities, and you have a self-driving car. It's the combination of these technologies that suddenly allow us to leap forward. When we have a look at the technology sector, yes, we've got things like DNA computing and everything else, but the smallest computers that we're now designing are virus-sized. What could you do with that? Again, we can see molecular computing, chemical computing, DNA computing. So while we actually come to an end of silicon-based computing, we are now looking at things like optical computing. There's going to be an explosion in the type of computing platforms that we have available to us. And then finally, now I've bored you enough, in the transportation sector, everything is going autonomous. Shell are creating a 600,000-ton fully autonomous LPG tanker. And in 2018, we've got small cargo ships basically that are going to be traveling up the coast of Norway that are fully autonomous. Regulators, again, have got to catch up. We have flying taxis out of Dubai. If you want to go to Dubai and you want to get into a flying taxi, it's basically a drone, you can. You can call it up like an Uber. We have autonomous semi-trucks. So there you go. Everything is going autonomous. Boeing, by 2030, think that they will have the first fully autonomous plane that is regulated. Because again, if you're taking off in a 747 or something like that, you push a button. As a pilot, it takes off. Push a button, it lands. But we're now automating the final sort of stages. And that's the end of that particular journey. So I hope it wasn't too boring for you. And I suppose...
Thank you very much.
There you go.
Fascinating.
Thank you very much.